Let me start with you, Sadanand. You have been a vocal critic of what you say is the far left's response, both in the United States of America and also in India. Sonia Gandhi now has an op-ed out. Would you characterize her op-ed as far left or pretty centrist? Because she is criticizing the Hamas, but she's saying hundreds of thousands of Gazans cannot be made to pay the price for this.
Look, all things considered, compared to many of the other responses we've seen across the Indian political spectrum, Sonia Gandhi's op ed is relatively balanced. She starts out, as all decent people should and all responsible people should, by condemning the horrors of Hamas's attacks on Israeli civilians. That, to me, is the bottom line. You start with that. If you are not able to do that, then there's no further conversation possible with you. You are not a moral actor. Beyond that, I have no problem with people who are also concerned with the civil loss of civilian life in Gaza. I think it's totally natural to be concerned. I'm concerned myself. And it's completely normal for people to have compassion for that. So nobody objects to someone saying that, well, Israel should minimize civilian casualties in its military operations. I think that's the right and decent thing to demand. The problem I have is with people who are willing to completely gloss over the horror and the atrocity of what Hamas did. And people who, frankly, both in politics and in public life in India, have used this very crudely just to mobilize one segment of the population and not to look at this in a more reasonable and humane manner.
By one segment, are you referring to the Indian Muslim?
I mean, the leadership. I'm not going to characterize 200 million Muslims. I haven't talked to 200 million Muslims. But if you look at the broad swath of Indian Muslim political leadership and intellectual leadership, how much condemnation of Hamas have you seen out there? How many people have you seen there who have put themselves in the shoes of those Israeli men, women, and children who were slaughtered, of the people at the music concert, of the people who have been abducted and paraded on the streets of Gaza? Has there been a word for them? Instead, we get people saying things like, well, we should not call this terrorism. We have a Hamas leader, Khalid Mashal, actually invited to address a rally in Kerala. It's utterly shameful. And so we have to be able to talk about this. And we can get into this more, later in your program. But my argument against this in the Wall Street Journal is twofold. One, of course, is the moral argument. But I also think in practical terms, this is very, very foolish for India's Muslim leadership, because they are actually leading their own people down to a very dark place.
I'll come to the Indian Muslim political leadership question in just a moment. I want to bring in Sanjay Jha. Sonia Gandhi's op-ed today did speak about, the Hamas, but also that Israel's response is not something she can support. But she also criticized the government for the abstention at the United Nations. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra went one step further. On her Twitter feed, she said that she was ashamed at the position that India had taken, that this had undone everything that India stood for. Well, Sanjay, the point is that India abstained, as you know, because Hamas was not mentioned in that resolution. India tried, along with other countries, to make the resolution mention Hamas. Do you believe that it would have been principled for India to support a ceasefire that did not first acknowledge that there was an act of terror? What if, for example, this was not October 7th, but 26/11 we were talking about? Sanjay Jha.
Barkha, I don't think anybody that I know of, and if anybody here knows of any individual with I would call a rational or a reasonable sense of thinking, has not condemned the Hamas attack on the civilians in Israel. I think that has been universally accepted. The problem has been the decoupling and the dehyphenating of the statelessness of the people of Palestine for 75 years, the complete and deliberate ignoring of the siege of Gaza for the last 16 years. And we all know the brutality that has been going on during this period. I mean, here is the point. Hamas's attack was a terrorist manifestation of a very militant outfit which has got the legitimate right given by the people of Palestine to govern Gaza. That is the reality. Mr. Modi's government keeps talking about, even I think Mr. Dhume talked about condemning Hamas. Well, he needs to ask that of the Modi government. Have they condemned Hamas officially? They haven't. Nobody is named Hamas because Hamas represents officially that province. Whether the election has not been held after 2007, is immaterial. For that matter, even the Palestinian Authority in West Bank has not had an election for over a decade. The point that we need to recognize, and your viewers should know, Barkha, that Hamas is a creation of the Israeli government. There is a duplicitousness. Hang on, let me finish this point. It's very critical. Because today you have Mr. Dhume talking about the Hamas being, kind of condemned by India. Fair enough. That's one point of conversation. But the other point, which cannot be denied, is that Hamas was actually funded, supported to deny the Palestinians a homeland through a policy of divide and rule. And Hamas is therefore an Israeli-backed creation.
Can I come in? Having just returned from reporting on this conflict, actually a lot of Israelis said what you did. They blamed Benjamin Netanyahu for strengthening Hamas and weakening the more moderate Palestinian Authority. So no disagreement there. I have covered protests. I think we have those images demanding Netanyahu's resignation, showing blood-splattered sort of pavements, saying that, basically you have blood on your hands, resign now. I have reported these stories. This is not the point of disagreement. But it's a little bit, Sanjay, like saying Indira Gandhi contributed towards the rise of Bhindranwale. So eventually when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, there should have been some qualification, some context, some rationalization. If Congress hadn't done that, this would have been okay. Or subsequently that killing 3,006 was okay. Neither is okay, Sanjay. Neither is okay.
No, Barkha,
the CIA created Bin Laden. Indira created, the LTT, like the Congress contributed, not Indira, contributed to the creation of the LTT.
Right.
So historical context is irrelevant in an act of terror. Is that not?
Well, hang on. I'll tell you, you raised a valid point. In an act of terror, let me tell you, nobody, and I started by saying I don't think anybody that I know of has endorsed the Hamas attack on the civilians in Israel. Nobody has. So I don't know why we are even discussing it. I think the fundamental point here has to be that why is an entity, Hamas is the more militant or the terrorist form of the Palestinian protest. And by the way, I read extensively. I know people in journalism worldwide, and they tell me, Barkha, that if today elections were held in the West Bank, Hamas will have a landslide victory. I want to ask two questions before we move on. There is a principle of proportionality, isn't it? Right? So we are talking about 1,400 or a little more than that, the number of Israelis killed, mostly on October 7th. As of now, and you can quote multiple sources, around 8,000 people killed in Palestine, including over 3,000 children. And by the way, people are being killed in the West Bank. So we are talking of Gaza, and everyone said the Palestinian Authority is the one that the Israelis deal with. Then why are people dying in the West Bank? So there is a bigger duplicitous politics being played out. Netanyahu is responsible because of the divide and rule politics that he played to deny the Palestinians their rights. And number two, for weakening his own country's democracy, their own polity, weakening their own security and intelligence, which is why I think Netanyahu is probably in his last legs, a matter of time. Because I think the Israelis have figured out that for the sake of playing his own legacy, he's actually destroyed the goodwill that I think the Jews have always had since the Holocaust.
Okay, you've said a lot. I need to go to both Varis and Yashwant, but I think Sadanand had a brief interjection. So Sadanand briefly, and then Varis.
Point out one thing, that the argument that Sanjay Jha was making, if an Israeli made that argument after gunmen from LET shot up the city in which he lives, Mumbai, they could make a very, very similar argument. I think it is a disgusting argument to make at this moment in time.
Which part?
Doesn't recognize
which part? Which part is disgusting?
The point about denying the horror and saying that, well, I know nobody who approved it. Of course, you don't know anybody who actually said, oh, yes, I approve of terrorist massacres. But there are many, many political figures, including Rahul Gandhi. It took 12 days for him to say anything about it.
Rubbish.
There are other people. It took him 12 days to say anything about it. Check out his own Twitter feed. Look at other
I need a right of rejoinder here.
You can look at, and there are many political figures, including the Speaker of the Kerala Assembly, who said we should not call this terrorism. There have been many people who've been trying to minimize this.
So Sanjay, okay, I can't have both of you hold the show hostage. So literally, Sanjay, one sentence, and then Varis Pathan. One sentence, Sanjay. Go ahead, Sanjay Jha. Yeah.
Sadanand Dhume is doing cherry picking, and just because you sit in Washington doesn't give you some first rights here. Here is the point. Jairam Ramesh, who's the chief spokesperson of the Congress party, condemned Hamas, condemned the terror strike on day one. And by the way, hello, excuse me. Why are you targeting Rahul Gandhi? He's not even the Congress spokesperson officially.
He's nobody in Congress.
Don't
Okay,
be convenient.
sorry, my bad.
By the way, Mr. Dhume, why did Narendra Modi, this is why the entire discussion has become what he has, and you'll have to hear it today. Narendra Modi mentioned Israel. He talked about the right to defend, the right to self-defense. Why did he not mention the Palestine cause? Why was it happening only after the Arab world probably put a lot of pressure on the Indian government?